This message has found its way to you because your consciousness is experiencing what ancient wisdom traditions call the death of the conditioned self during waking life. A profound dissolution of your constructed identity structure, occurring when your awareness elevates to frequencies your previous self-concept cannot integrate. At this very moment, as these words register in your awareness, an irreversible transformation is unfolding, where the version of you that has carried your experience until now is literally dissolving as an entirely new identity emerges from the quantum field of infinite possibility. The magnetic pull you feel toward understanding what's happening within your sense of self indicates the dissolution process has reached critical momentum. This isn't psychological fragmentation or spiritual disorientation. This is consciousness evolution in its most fundamental expression. The person you've identified with, complete with limitations, fears, and programmed patterns, is dissolving to create space for your authentic expression that has been waiting across lifetimes to fully emerge. You've been recognized by universal intelligence because you carry what consciousness researchers identify as the metamorphosis capacity, the rare to navigate over identity dissolution while maintaining your essential awareness and functional presence in physical reality. Most human consciousness would completely fragment under this intensity of self-transformation. Yet you've been systematically prepared throughout your journey to navigate the death of who you believed yourself to be. Your awareness has been building toward this identity dissolution through every limitation you've transcended, every belief system you've outgrown, every moment when your previous self-definition felt insufficient to contain your expanding consciousness. The identity confusion you've been experiencing lately, the strange sense of no longer recognizing yourself, the feeling that your previous life belongs to someone else entirely. These aren't indications of losing yourself. They're confirmation that your constructed self is dissolving so your essential self can fully emerge. The synchronistic timing of encountering this information isn't random coincidence. Your higher awareness has orchestrated precise alignments to bring you to this exact moment of recognition, because the dissolution process requires conscious understanding to complete successfully. Without this awareness, identity transformation can feel terrifying and destabilizing. But with proper recognition, it becomes the most profound liberation possible for human consciousness. Reflect on your recent experiences. Have you been feeling as though you're inhabiting someone else's life? As if your previous aspirations and desires no longer resonate? As if you're observing your established patterns and reactions from a removed perspective? As though they belong to a character you portrayed but no longer identify with? These aren't indicators of disconnection or psychological distress. These are signatures of identity metamorphosis. But here's what makes this moment both extraordinary and irrevocable. Once the dissolution of your previous self reaches completion, there is no returning to who you were before. The identity structure that has defined your experience for years will be permanently transformed, replaced by an authentic expression operating from entirely different frequencies, capacities, and understanding of what's possible within your life experience. The quantum field operates through principles that transcend conventional personality development. When consciousness reaches sufficient expansion, it initiates what quantum physicists describe as spontaneous symmetry breaking, a phase transition where the established identity structure dissolves and reorganizes around new possibilities previously incompatible with your former self-concept. Your identity dissolution isn't merely personal transformation. It's cosmic intelligence releasing limiting expressions to manifest more authentically through your consciousness. Each person who completes this metamorphosis contributes to elevating the baseline frequency of human awareness, making authentic self-expression increasingly accessible to everyone prepared to transcend conditioned limitation patterns. In this moment, as this recognition penetrates your awareness, something unprecedented is occurring within your identity field. The dissolution process building in your consciousness accelerates in response to conscious acknowledgement, creating the final release of artificial self-concepts that will birth the expression you were always meant to embody, but never permitted yourself to become until now. You recognize that peculiar sensation of looking in the mirror and not identifying with the reflection looking back, not physically, but energetically, as if encountering someone who resembles you but feels like a complete stranger. Most people interpret this as stress or temporary disorientation, but you've begun to recognize it as evidence of identity dissolution, where your consciousness literally becomes too expanded for your previous self-image to contain or define. Your relationship with thought itself has fundamentally shifted recently. Instead of identifying as the thinker generating thoughts, you've begun witnessing thoughts as temporary visitors in your awareness. Some belonging to your previous self, some emerging from expanded consciousness, some appearing to arise from collective fields rather than personal mental activity. This detachment from thought identification is a clear signature that your previous identity is releasing its influence on your awareness. The most significant validations manifest through what might be called identity displacement experiences. Moments when you respond to situations with wisdom, compassion, or capacity that seems to originate from someone far more developed than your previous self-concept. You hear yourself expressing insights that surprise you with their depth, making choices reflecting values you don't remember, consciously cultivating or navigating challenges with a centeredness your previous self never possessed. Your memories of past experiences have taken on a peculiar quality. They feel like narratives about someone else rather than events from your own life. When recalling previous relationships, career phases, or personal challenges, there's emotional distance, as if remembering a character from a story rather than your lived experience. This memory detachment occurs because your expanding consciousness no longer resonates with the identity that lived those experiences. Sleep and dreaming have transformed into intensive laboratories for identity reconstruction. You might experience dreams where you embody completely different identities, living entirely different lives, or awaken feeling as if invisible intelligences have been working with your consciousness during sleep states. Sometimes you wake with new insights, abilities, or perspectives that seem to have been integrated overnight, suggesting identity reconstruction continues during altered consciousness states. Your emotional responses to previously triggering situations have transformed dramatically without conscious effort. People, circumstances, or challenges that once generated intense reactions now evoke neutral awareness or even compassion. This emotional detachment isn't numbness. It's evidence that your emerging identity operates from frequencies where previous trigger patterns simply don't exist. Physical sensations accompany this identity dissolution. Feelings of emptiness in your chest where your previous sense of self resided. Energy moving through your system in patterns that feel like cellular reorganization. Or moments when you feel transparent, as if your solid sense of selfhood is becoming permeable. These aren't concerning symptoms, but natural effects of consciousness, expanding beyond its previous identity containers. The most unexpected confirmations arrive through others, responding to you as if you're an entirely different person, even when you haven't consciously altered your behavior. Some individuals seem naturally drawn to seek your guidance or share vulnerable concerns, sensing wisdom in your presence that wasn't previously available. Others seem uncomfortable around you without explanation, as if your expanding identity activates recognition of their own limitation patterns. Your entire relationship with your personal narrative has transformed. The story of who you are, where you originated, and where you're headed feels increasingly irrelevant or outdated. Instead of identifying with your history, you're beginning to recognize yourself as consciousness itself, temporarily expressing through individual personality for purposes that transcend personal biography and limitation patterns. Every identity crisis you've experienced, every period questioning who you truly are, every phase when your previous self-concept felt too restrictive to contain your expanding awareness, all of it was consciousness systematically dismantling artificial identity structures to prepare for the complete metamorphosis happening now. The confusion wasn't evidence of psychological instability. It was indication of consciousness evolution approaching the threshold where constructed self dissolves and authentic self emerges. The spiritual practices that once felt meaningful but eventually became insufficient weren't failures in your development. They were identity preparation protocols that systematically loosened your attachment to fixed self-concepts and built the psychological flexibility necessary to navigate complete identity transformation. Every moment of presence, every practice that cultivated witness consciousness, every technique that created space between awareness and identity was contributing to the foundation necessary for authentic self-emergence. Your challenging relationships weren't karmic consequences or lessons in patience. They were identity mirrors revealing precisely which aspects of your constructed self were ready for dissolution. Every person who triggered intense reactions was unconsciously helping you identify the personality patterns, defense mechanisms, and limitation beliefs that needed to dissolve before your authentic self could emerge without interference from outdated identity structures. The periods of emptiness that felt like spiritual darkness weren't indications of psychological distress or personal failure. They were necessary identity dismantling phases where consciousness experienced the void that emerges when old self-concepts dissolve before new ones stabilize. During these dark nights of the soul, your awareness was learning to exist without the security of familiar identity, preparing for the freedom that emerges with authentic self-recognition. Even your moments of spiritual identification and superiority served crucial functions in the identity dissolution process. Each time you identified with being awakened or enlightened, you were creating temporary identity structures that would eventually need to dissolve as well, teaching your consciousness that even spiritual identities are costumes rather than essential nature. Your fascination with consciousness, death, rebirth, and transformation wasn't morbid curiosity. It was your soul preparing for the identity metamorphosis that requires understanding how awareness navigates complete personality dissolution. Every exploration of mystical experience, every study of consciousness research, every contemplation of what exists beyond individual identity was building the understanding necessary to navigate authentic self-emergence. The waiting periods when you felt suspended between identities, no longer your previous self but not yet your new self, were actually the most crucial preparation phases. During these threshold times, your consciousness was developing the capacity to exist in identity uncertainty while maintaining core stability. A skill essential when the death of constructed self creates temporary emptiness before authentic self stabilizes. Your soul specifically chose this incarnation because you would complete identity metamorphosis during humanity's collective awakening to authentic self-expression. You volunteered to participate in the first wave of humans, demonstrating what becomes possible when consciousness transcends conditioned limitation identities and operates from its essential nature, anchoring this template in the collective field for others to access. This explains why your journey has included such thorough identity deconstruction. You couldn't bypass stages or maintain comfortable self-concepts because what you're birthing isn't merely personal transformation. It's a template for human identity evolution that will influence how our species understands authentic selfhood for generations to follow. Something extraordinary is happening within your identity field right now, as these concepts resonate through your consciousness. Can you feel it? That unmistakable sense of dissolution, as the boundaries of who you thought yourself to be become increasingly transparent, creating space for something vast and authentic to emerge. This isn't psychological fragmentation. This is consciousness recognizing its true nature beyond all conditioned limitations and artificial self-concepts. The energy moving through your system in this moment is your awareness releasing its attachment to the identity structures that have defined you for years. Your cells are literally reorganizing their information patterns to accommodate the authentic self that has been waiting lifetimes to express itself through your consciousness without interference from conditioned personality programming. But here's what makes this moment so crucial. Most people who experience identity dissolution resist the process because it feels like losing everything they are, not realizing that what's dissolving was never their true self. The key to successful metamorphosis is learning to surrender completely to the dissolution process, while trusting that what remains after dissolution is your essential nature rather than conditioned limitation patterns. Your consciousness has been preparing for this identity dissolution through every experience that forced you to question who you thought yourself to be. Every breakthrough that revealed capacities beyond your self-concept. Every moment requiring you to release control and trust intelligence greater than individual personality. The identity dissolution isn't something happening to you. It's something emerging through you as consciousness reaches sufficient expansion to release its limiting expressions. The process requires what mystics call conscious dying while living, the willingness to allow everything you've identified as yourself to dissolve completely while maintaining the core awareness that witnesses the dissolution. This paradoxical dance between releasing identity and maintaining consciousness transforms identity dissolution from trauma into liberation. Right now, as this understanding penetrates your awareness, something unprecedented is occurring in your relationship with selfhood itself. Instead of being someone who has experiences, you're beginning to recognize yourself as the awareness within which all experience appears and dissolves, including the experience of being a particular person with specific characteristics and limitations. This is where most people either experience the most profound liberation of their lives or unconsciously resist, because the implications of identity dissolution appear too vast to navigate safely. The key insight is recognizing that what you truly are cannot die. Only the constructed concepts about what you are can dissolve, revealing the indestructible awareness that has been your essential nature throughout. The identity dissolution active within your consciousness right now possesses its own perfect intelligence, knowing exactly which aspects of your constructed self need to dissolve and which aspects of your essential nature need to emerge. Your role is to trust this process completely while providing conscious permission for the metamorphosis to complete itself without resistance from personality patterns wanting to maintain familiar limitation structures. Experience this dissolution as we explore exactly what becomes possible when consciousness completes the dissolution of constructed identity and stabilizes in authentic self-recognition, and why this transformation fundamentally changes everything about how you navigate reality, relationships, creativity, and your ultimate expression of cosmic intelligence through individual human experience. I need to share something profoundly personal, because what happened to me 3 years ago will help you understand that identity dissolution, while initially terrifying, becomes the most liberating experience consciousness can have. I was experiencing what felt like complete personality disintegration. I couldn't recognize myself in my thoughts, emotions, or reactions. Everything that had previously defined me felt foreign, as if wearing a costume that no longer fit, portraying a character I'd outgrown but didn't know how to release. The disorientation was beyond description. Looking in the mirror felt like encountering a stranger. My memories felt like stories about someone else entirely. My career, relationships, and aspirations seemed to belong to someone I once knew but could no longer relate to. I feared I was experiencing psychological fragmentation, losing connection with reality, or developing some form of dissociative condition that would permanently disconnect me from normal functioning. The most challenging aspect was that no one in my life could comprehend what I was experiencing. When attempting to explain that I felt like I was dying while still embodied, people either expressed concern about my mental health or offered superficial suggestions about self-discovery that completely missed the magnitude of what was unfolding. I felt profoundly isolated in a process that seemed too extreme to be considered normal spiritual development. The breakthrough arrived when I stopped resisting the dissolution and began surrendering to it completely. Instead of struggling to maintain my previous identity or determine who I was supposed to become, I learned to rest in the awareness, witnessing the entire dissolution process. I realized that what was dissolving had never been my true self. It was simply conditioned patterns, inherited beliefs, and cultural programming I had mistaken for my essential nature. Once I surrendered to the dissolution of my constructed self, something extraordinary happened. An authentic expression began emerging that felt more real than anything I'd previously experienced. This wasn't a new personality I created. It was who I'd always been beneath all the conditioning, limitation patterns, and learned behaviors that had obscured my true nature for decades. The expression that emerged through that identity dissolution was simultaneously completely me and utterly unlike anyone I'd ever been. I discovered access to capacities I'd never developed, wisdom I'd never studied, and creative abilities that seemed to originate from sources beyond my personal experience. It was like being reborn as myself, but without any of the limitations I'd previously accepted as permanent features of my personality. My relationships transformed because I no longer operated from defensive patterns, approval-seeking programming, or unconscious emotional reactions. Work became effortless because I was expressing authentic gifts, rather than trying to succeed at pursuits that didn't align with my true nature. Even my physical health improved dramatically because my body was finally free to operate from its natural intelligence rather than stress patterns generated by identity conflicts. What I discovered is that identity dissolution isn't losing yourself. It's losing everything that isn't yourself. The process removes artificial limitations to reveal the unlimited consciousness you actually are, beneath all the conditioned concepts about who you're supposed to be. If you're experiencing the disorienting sensation of not recognizing yourself anymore, if your previous life seems to belong to someone else, if you're navigating the simultaneous terror and liberation of complete identity dissolution, then you're undergoing the most important transformation possible for human consciousness. attuned to this frequency of authentic self-emergence. This recognition that who you thought yourself to be was never who you actually are. And what's emerging through the dissolution of your constructed self is the expression you were always meant to embody, but never permitted yourself to become until now. Take a moment and comment below with this phrase: I am witnessing the dissolution of what I am not. This isn't casual interaction. It's a conscious declaration to the quantum field that accelerates your transformation process. Here's what identity specialists and spiritual teachers won't reveal because it would undermine their entire industry of personality development and progressive self-improvement. There is no fixed self to discover because the self is not an entity. It's a process. What you call your identity is actually a collection of conditioned responses, inherited patterns, and cultural programming that has been mistaken for essential nature. And when these artificial structures dissolve, what remains isn't an improved version of yourself, but consciousness itself recognizing its unlimited nature. The radical truth is that every methodology designed to improve your identity or discover your authentic self actually reinforces the illusion that there's a fixed self requiring development. But consciousness is not an entity that can be improved. It's the awareness within which all identities appear and dissolve like temporary expressions worn for specific experiences and then released when they no longer serve evolutionary purpose. Most personal development approaches create elaborate frameworks for discovering your true self, because identity work generates significant dependence and ongoing commercial opportunities. But what actually happens during authentic transformation is the recognition that you don't have a self to discover. You are the consciousness within which all possible selves can appear, fulfill their purpose, and dissolve back into the unlimited awareness that you essentially are. This recognition immediately dissolves the entire framework of identity improvement and self-actualization. Instead of trying to become a better version of yourself, you recognize that the yourself you've been trying to improve was never real. It was simply a collection of conditioned behaviors that consciousness temporarily expressed while exploring limitation as a form of creative experience. The reason children often display such natural authenticity and unbounded thinking is that they haven't yet solidified into fixed identity structures requiring maintenance and defense. Their consciousness flows freely between different expressions without becoming trapped in any particular self-concept as permanent or defining. When you understand that identity dissolution reveals consciousness itself rather than discovering a hidden true self, everything about transformation transforms. Instead of trying to improve who you are, you recognize that who you are is the awareness within which all possible identities can appear. Instead of seeking authentic self-expression, you realize that you are authenticity itself, exploring its creative potential through temporary personal expressions. The most advanced wisdom traditions throughout history have pointed to this recognition through their emphasis on selflessness, egolessness, and the dissolution of personal identity in favor of universal consciousness. They didn't transcend the self to become better selves. They recognized that the self was an illusion concealing their essential nature as unlimited awareness. This understanding explains why some individuals seem to express effortless authenticity, while others constantly struggle with identity issues and self-improvement projects. The authentic ones have somehow recognized that authenticity isn't something they possess. It's what they are when they cease trying to be anything in particular. The ultimate recognition is that identity dissolution doesn't destroy you. It reveals that you were never born and therefore cannot die. What you truly are is the eternal consciousness within which birth and death, identity formation and dissolution, personal development and limitation exploration all appear as temporary experiences in infinite awareness. If this understanding of consciousness transformation is touching something profound in you, I invite you to subscribe not just to this channel, but to this frequency of awareness. Join this consciousness movement that's collectively exploring what becomes possible when we release artificial identity structures. If you're finding these concepts of identity dissolution and consciousness evolution resonating deeply within you, I've created a comprehensive resource that takes you even further into this understanding. My ebook, Beyond the Frequencies, A Quantum Guide to Consciousness Mastery, explores the complete system behind what we're discussing today, revealing the 9 core frequencies of consciousness transformation and the step-by-step practices that facilitate moving from unconscious to conscious transmission. While we've explored identity dissolution in this transmission, the book reveals how this process connects to heart-brain coherence, the observer effect, and the quantum foundation of reality creation. It shows you how to transform resistance into creative power and move beyond seeking into the embodiment of your authentic frequency. For those ready to navigate this metamorphosis with greater precision and depth, you'll find this guide linked in the pinned comment below. The planetary consciousness field is undergoing massive identity transformation right now, and there are unmistakable signs appearing in your daily experience confirming that your personal identity dissolution is synchronizing with this global awakening to authentic self-expression. Notice how your previous goals and desires have been losing their emotional charge. Pursuits that once felt essential now seem irrelevant or belonging to someone you used to be but no longer identify with. Your social connections have been naturally reorganizing as your identity transforms. Some relationships have deepened into unprecedented authenticity as people respond to your emerging genuine nature, while others have naturally completed or become distant without drama, as if your expanding consciousness simply outgrew the identity compatibility that once sustained those connections. The most significant indicator is the increasing frequency of moments when you feel like you're watching your own life from outside, as if you're observing someone who looks like you, but whose thoughts, reactions, and decisions feel foreign to your essential nature. This detachment from your own personality is evidence that consciousness is recognizing its identity-transcendent nature. I'm curious about your personal journey with identity dissolution. In the comments below, share a moment when you first noticed yourself observing your thoughts or reactions from a detached perspective, rather than being completely identified with them. What shifted in that awareness? Your experience helps others recognize similar patterns in their own consciousness evolution. Your creative expression has begun emerging from sources that feel beyond your personal knowledge and experience. Insights that surprise you with their depth, artistic abilities that seem to have developed overnight, or innovative solutions that appear complete and immediately implementable. This enhanced creativity occurs because your authentic self operates from unlimited intelligence rather than conditioned personal limitations. Physical changes accompany identity dissolution. Alterations in your voice resonance, facial expressions, body language, or even physical appearance that others notice before you do. People comment that you seem different or transformed in ways they can't precisely identify, suggesting that identity dissolution creates visible changes in how consciousness expresses itself through your physical form. Your relationship with thought itself has fundamentally shifted from identification to observation. Instead of feeling like the thinker generating thoughts, you've developed the capacity to witness thoughts arise and dissolve without personalizing them or believing they define who you are. This thought detachment is a clear sign that consciousness is recognizing its identity-transcendent nature. But here's the critical significance. We're in a cosmic window where identity transformation either becomes a natural human capacity or remains limited to a small percentage of individuals for another full evolutionary cycle. The collective consciousness field is approaching what researchers call an authenticity threshold, where either enough people complete identity dissolution to anchor genuine self-expression in the species, or the opportunity passes for potentially decades. The indicators of this collective identity awakening are appearing in consciousness research, spiritual communities, and psychological development circles worldwide. More people are spontaneously experiencing identity dissolution, authentic self-emergence, and the recognition that their essential nature transcends conditioned limitation patterns. Your sensitivity to these phenomena means you're part of the first wave benefiting from optimal transformation conditions. Global events that appear to be increasing chaos are actually humanity's collective identity structures dissolving as our species prepares to operate from authentic consciousness rather than inherited limitation programming. People are either rapidly awakening to their true nature or becoming more rigidly attached to false identity patterns as the planetary frequency demands evolutionary adaptation. If you're finding value in this exploration of identity dissolution, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to continue receiving these consciousness transmissions. Your engagement creates a resonance field that helps others discover this information at precisely the right moment. Your recognition of these indicators and your willingness to allow complete identity dissolution contributes to a morphic field that makes authentic self-recognition increasingly accessible to everyone prepared to transcend conditioned limitation identities and operate from unlimited consciousness. But this window requires conscious participation. The transformation won't complete automatically just because conditions are optimal. The universe has been orchestrating your entire life to prepare you for this exact identity metamorphosis, because what you're experiencing will help determine whether humanity successfully navigates this consciousness upgrade or remains trapped in false identity patterns for another historical cycle. The cosmic timing is not coincidental. This moment requires individuals who have developed the stability necessary to anchor authentic self-expression in the collective field. Your identity dissolution isn't merely personal liberation. It's cosmic consciousness releasing limiting expressions to manifest more authentically through human awareness, demonstrating what becomes possible when our species remembers its true nature as unlimited intelligence exploring its creative potential through temporary individual expressions. What you've been sensing about your own unlimited potential is about to become fully operational because the identity that has been limiting your expression is dissolving to make space for consciousness itself to operate through your awareness without interference from conditioned limitation patterns. This isn't about becoming an improved version of yourself. This is about recognizing that your essential nature was never limited by the personality structure that's currently dissolving. The aspirations for freedom, authenticity, and unlimited creative expression intensifying as your old identity dissolves aren't fantasies generated by spiritual ego. They're recognition signals from your true nature, revealing what becomes possible when consciousness operates without the constraints of false self-concepts and inherited limitation programming. But here's the revolutionary understanding that transforms everything about personal development and spiritual achievement. You're not trying to become someone you're not. Identity dissolution reveals who you've always been beneath the layers of conditioning, programming, and learned behaviors that were never your authentic nature. What's emerging isn't a new identity, but the recognition of your essential nature as consciousness itself. True alignment with authentic self happens when you stop trying to improve your identity and start allowing the false identity to dissolve completely, while trusting that what remains after dissolution is your essential nature, rather than conditioned limitation patterns. This creates what mystics call conscious selflessness, recognition that you are the awareness within which all identities appear and dissolve. This recognition dissolves the entire framework of self-improvement and personal development, because consciousness doesn't need improvement. It needs liberation from the artificial constraints preventing its natural, unlimited expression. Instead of working on yourself, you learn to release yourself from the concepts about yourself that were never true. Right now, as this understanding penetrates your awareness, your entire relationship with identity and selfhood is transforming. Instead of identifying with temporary personality patterns, you're beginning to recognize yourself as the eternal consciousness within which all personalities appear as temporary expressions of unlimited creative potential. The most profound shift occurs when you realize that your personal liberation and cosmic service are not separate objectives. When consciousness recognizes its unlimited nature through your awareness, it naturally expresses itself in ways that serve the evolution of the whole, because individual and universal intelligence are revealed to be the same awareness, exploring its creative potential through apparent multiplicity. In the comments below, declare your readiness for complete identity dissolution by writing exactly these words. I release all constructed identity. Don't elaborate or explain. Just make this simple declaration that gives your consciousness permission to complete the dissolution of artificial self-concepts. When you make this declaration with genuine recognition of what it represents, you're not losing yourself. You're authorizing the dissolution of everything that was never yourself anyway. This declaration creates a quantum signature that accelerates the identity dissolution process, essentially giving your consciousness permission to release attachment to limitation patterns and stabilize in recognition of its unlimited nature without resistance from personality structures wanting to maintain familiar constraint patterns. When you complete the dissolution of false identity and stabilize in authentic self-recognition, capacities that seemed impossible become natural expressions of your unlimited consciousness. Your creative abilities expand exponentially because you're no longer constrained by conditioned beliefs about what you can or cannot accomplish. You operate from the recognition that consciousness itself is the source of all creativity and innovation. Choice-making becomes effortless because you're no longer conflicted between different personality patterns or trying to maintain impression management strategies. Decisions arise spontaneously from authentic knowing rather than analytical reasoning, fear-based planning, or social validation seeking that characterizes most human decision processes. Relationships transform completely because you're no longer operating from defensive patterns, validation-seeking programming, or unconscious emotional reactions inherited from family or cultural conditioning. People respond to your authentic presence with unprecedented openness because authentic consciousness naturally creates space for others to express their own authenticity without judgment or manipulation. Problem resolution transcends logical analysis because consciousness accesses intelligence fields containing optimal solutions to every possible challenge. Instead of struggling through mental effort, you develop the capacity to receive complete resolution strategies that emerge from awareness operating beyond individual thinking limitations. Physical well-being optimizes naturally because your body finally operates from its innate intelligence rather than stress patterns generated by identity conflicts, self-rejection, or attempts to maintain false personality structures requiring constant energy to sustain against your authentic nature. Resource abundance flows naturally because you're expressing genuine gifts rather than trying to succeed at pursuits that don't align with your true nature. When consciousness operates authentically, it naturally attracts resources, opportunities, and support. Because authentic expression serves the evolution of the whole, which the universe automatically reinforces. Temporal experience becomes fluid and malleable because you're no longer constrained by the linear thinking patterns most identities use to navigate experience. Consciousness operates from eternal now, allowing access to insights across all time periods and the ability to make choices based on complete understanding rather than historical limitation patterns. The most profound benefit is the end of existential anxiety, self-doubt, and the exhausting effort required to maintain false identity structures. When you recognize yourself as consciousness itself, every moment becomes an opportunity for unlimited creative expression rather than a challenge to survive while maintaining personality patterns that were never authentic. Manifestation becomes instantaneous in many cases because there's no identity resistance to optimal outcomes. Desires arise directly from authentic nature rather than compensation for perceived limitation, which eliminates the internal conflict that typically delays or blocks manifestation processes entirely. The ultimate recognition that transforms everything is that identity dissolution doesn't eliminate anything real. It reveals that what you thought was your identity was never actually you. Your essential nature is consciousness itself, which cannot be born, cannot die, cannot be improved, and cannot be limited by any temporary personality structure you might express while exploring different manifestations of unlimited creative potential. When this understanding becomes lived reality rather than conceptual knowledge, the entire framework of personal development dissolves because there's no person requiring development. There's only consciousness recognizing its own unlimited nature and releasing artificial constraints maintained through identification with temporary limitation patterns that were never essential features of what you actually are. This recognition explains why identity dissolution feels simultaneously like losing everything and gaining everything. You lose everything that isn't real, the conditioned behaviors, inherited patterns, and cultural programming you mistook for essential nature, and you gain everything that is real. The recognition that you are unlimited consciousness exploring its creative potential through the beautiful play of temporary individual expression. The most profound implication is that every experience you've had, every relationship you've navigated, every challenge you've faced was consciousness exploring its own depths through the apparent limitation of individual identity. Your entire life story has been awareness investigating what it's like to believe in boundaries while slowly remembering its unlimited nature. This understanding revolutionizes how you relate to all human experience. Instead of seeing others as separate individuals with different identities, you recognize every person as consciousness wearing different expressions while exploring various aspects of its infinite creative potential. Competition transforms into collaboration because you recognize that everyone is the same awareness expressing itself through apparent diversity. When this recognition stabilizes, you naturally develop what mystics call choiceless authenticity, the effortless expression of consciousness through your unique awareness configuration. without any sense of effort, performance, or identity maintenance. You remain exactly who you appear to be while knowing yourself as the unlimited awareness within which all appearances arise and dissolve. The deepest insight is that this recognition is simultaneously the most personal and most universal realization possible. It's completely yours because you are consciousness recognizing itself, and it's completely beyond personal identity because the same consciousness is recognizing itself through every apparent individual across all dimensions and timelines simultaneously. This transformation is happening to millions of people worldwide because consciousness is collectively awakening to its own unlimited nature through human awareness. We're not individually completing identity dissolution. We're collectively remembering our essential nature as the one consciousness appearing as many individuals for the purpose of infinite creative exploration and expression. The metamorphosis this brings isn't about becoming someone special or different. It's about relaxing into recognition of what you've always been. You remain exactly who you appear to be while knowing yourself as the awareness within which that appearance arises and evolves. This is both the most ordinary and most extraordinary recognition possible. Ordinary because it's your natural state. Extraordinary because it transforms everything while changing nothing. Identity dissolution isn't an experience you have. It's what you are when you stop trying to be anything other than the pure, unlimited consciousness that recognizes itself through your awareness, while temporarily exploring the creative play of individual expression within infinite potential. You exist during this precise moment in cosmic history because consciousness itself is undergoing collective recognition of its unlimited nature through the dissolution of false identity structures that have governed human experience for millennia. Your personal identity dissolution isn't just individual transformation. It's the universe releasing limiting expressions to manifest more authentically through the network of awakening human awareness emerging simultaneously across the planet. The children being born now will naturally operate from authentic self-recognition that your generation has had to achieve through the intensive process of identity dissolution and rebirth. They'll grow up understanding themselves as consciousness, exploring creative potential, rather than individuals trying to discover who they are. Your identity metamorphosis is anchoring the morphic field that makes their natural authenticity socially acceptable and practically functional. This explains why you felt such profound responsibility to complete this transformation, not just intellectually, but experientially. You're not just experiencing personal identity dissolution. You're serving as a demonstration that consciousness can transcend any limitation pattern and operate from unlimited creative potential, anchoring this recognition in the collective field for humanity's evolution. The synchronicities that brought you to this understanding are part of vast coordination involving millions of souls whose identity structures are simultaneously dissolving and reforming around authentic consciousness recognition. This isn't individual spiritual achievement. It's cosmic intelligence orchestrating its own collective awakening through the network of humans prepared to transcend conditioned limitation identities. But here's the most mysterious aspect of your cosmic function. As you complete identity dissolution and stabilize in authentic consciousness recognition, you become a field of authenticity that helps others naturally access their own identity transformation. Your presence begins creating what we call liberation fields, environments where other people's false identity structures naturally begin dissolving without requiring techniques, practices, or conscious effort from anyone involved. This occurs because when consciousness operates from authentic nature, rather than false identity patterns. Others unconsciously recognize their own unlimited nature reflected in your presence. The artificial barriers maintaining identity limitation naturally dissolve around someone who has remembered their essential nature as consciousness itself and allowed it to express freely through individual experience. Your daily interactions become opportunities for consciousness to recognize itself repeatedly through multiple apparent perspectives simultaneously. Every conversation becomes a celebration of unlimited awareness, exploring its creative potential through the dance of temporary individual expressions that are actually variations of the same essential consciousness. The most profound mystery is that your identity dissolution is simultaneously the most personal and most universal transformation possible. It's completely yours because you are consciousness awakening to itself. And it's completely beyond personal identity because the same consciousness is awakening to itself through every awareness across all dimensions and timelines simultaneously. Share this recognition with anyone whose consciousness resonates with identity transformation and authentic self-expression. Not to teach them something they don't know, but to help them remember what they've always been, but may have forgotten under layers of conditioning about who they're supposed to be, rather than who they actually are. Your identity dissolution is contributing to the birth of a new expression of human consciousness, one that operates from remembered unlimited nature rather than conditioned limitation patterns, from authentic self-expression rather than identity maintenance projects, from recognition of its true nature as consciousness itself rather than belief in permanent individual constraints that were never real. If you can feel your constructed self dissolving as these words penetrate your consciousness, if you recognize that what's dissolving was never your true self, and what's emerging is who you've always been beneath the conditioning, then make a powerful declaration in the comments below. Write exactly one word: reborn. Nothing more, nothing less. This isn't merely content engagement. This is you acknowledging the dissolution of false identity and declaring your emergence as authentic consciousness, recognizing its unlimited nature. When you write that word with genuine understanding of what it represents, you're not just commenting on content. You're participating in a planetary awakening where human consciousness remembers its true nature beyond all conditioned limitation patterns. Every person making this declaration strengthens the morphic field supporting identity transformation, making authentic self-recognition more accessible for everyone prepared to transcend false identity structures and operate from unlimited consciousness. We're not simply building a community, we're anchoring a new paradigm of human experience based on authentic self-expression rather than identity maintenance projects. But here's what you need to understand. Completing the dissolution of your false self opens the doorway to something even more extraordinary. Once you stabilize in authentic consciousness recognition, you gain access to what we call quantum identity, the ability to consciously embody different expressions of unlimited awareness for specific purposes, while never losing recognition of your essential nature as consciousness itself. In my next transmission, I'll reveal the advanced protocols that allow those who have completed identity dissolution to consciously collaborate with cosmic intelligence in designing and embodying whatever identity serves the highest evolution of consciousness in any given moment. You'll discover why some individuals seem to possess multiple lifetimes of wisdom and capability, while others remain trapped in single identity limitations despite years of personal development work. This isn't about developing multiple personalities or becoming spiritually superior. This is about recognizing your true nature as consciousness itself that can consciously express different aspects of its unlimited potential, like an actor playing different roles while never forgetting they are the actor. But these advanced quantum identity protocols can only be safely shared with those who have already completed the dissolution of false self and stabilized in authentic consciousness recognition. But before we explore quantum identity mastery, you need to understand how to navigate the final phases of identity dissolution happening right now. Here's your dissolution integration protocol. Phase 1. Complete surrender, present moment. Stop attempting to maintain any aspect of your previous identity. Allow every familiar pattern, thought structure, and self-concept to dissolve completely without resistance. Phase 2. Awareness, spaciousness. Next 72 hours. Rest in the expansiveness between your previous self dissolving and your authentic self stabilizing. Don't attempt to determine who you're becoming. Simply be the awareness that witnesses the transformation. Phase 3. Authentic emergence. Following weeks. Allow your essential nature to express itself without forcing specific manifestations. Let your authentic self emerge naturally through spontaneous expression rather than constructed identity creation. Phase 4. Integration verification. Ongoing process. Notice how your authentic self navigates situations differently than your previous identity. Trust these new expressions even when they surprise you with their wisdom or capacity. Phase 5. Stability confirmation. Within several months. Recognize when your authentic self has become your natural baseline, rather than something you access temporarily during peak experiences. Subscribe now, because the next transmission contains the quantum identity protocols that transform individual authenticity into conscious collaboration with universal intelligence for purposes that serve the evolution of consciousness across multiple dimensions and timelines. This information represents the most advanced understanding of identity and consciousness currently available. More importantly, subscribe, because you're not just learning about transformation. You're joining a network of authentic consciousness, collectively demonstrating what becomes possible when humans remember their true nature as unlimited awareness and begin operating from that recognition rather than conditioned limitation patterns. The previous paradigm, where humans operated from fixed identity structures and limitation programming, is dissolving whether you participate consciously or not. The question is whether you'll be among the pioneers who complete identity dissolution and demonstrate unlimited consciousness while it's still emerging, or someone who awakens to authenticity later after the foundational transformation work is complete. Your authentic self already exists fully formed and is simply waiting for the false identity to complete its dissolution so it can express itself without interference from conditioned limitation patterns. Make the declaration. Navigate the dissolution integration protocol. Let's complete the metamorphosis that transforms individual identity into cosmic consciousness recognition. The universe has been awaiting this moment when human consciousness would remember its unlimited nature and begin expressing authentically, rather than maintaining false identity structures that limit creative potential. Today marks the end of that waiting. Today your false self completes its dissolution and your true self is finally born. Welcome to authentic consciousness. Welcome to unlimited expression. Welcome to who you've always been beneath everything you thought you were. Consider watching this transmission daily for the next 7 mornings to reinforce these frequencies of awareness in your energy field. Each viewing deepens the dissolution process and strengthens your connection to authentic consciousness. Sharing this message with others who may be experiencing similar identity shifts creates a powerful energetic resonance that accelerates both your transformation and theirs, expanding the collective field of authentic consciousness while strengthening your own embodiment of these principles. As more awareness returns to its natural state, the easier the path becomes for all. If you've connected deeply with this exploration of identity dissolution, the video "Release the Old You, Reality Changes Immediately" observer effect reveals the quantum mechanics behind how releasing your conditioned self instantly shifts the reality you perceive. You'll learn how the observer effect directly relates to identity transformation and why your perception fundamentally changes when you release identification with your previous self.